Hey guys, this is Austin. This is the iPhone 11, and if you're considering buying an iPhone, this is the one to get. So we have to start with the cameras. So this year, the iPhone 11 has a pair of cameras, a standard wide angle as well as a new ultra wide. What I'm curious to see is how exactly this compares to its predecessor, the iPhone XR. So first of all, let's start with the main shooters. Well, I can immediately see that there's a lot more dynamic range on the 11, especially when you look over Ken's shoulder. There's a little bit more detail in the row, whereas it's pretty much bricked on the XR. Also, this looks sharp. Like, that looks significantly sharper. If you look at the text above the red, like on the handle, I can barely read it says camera front. But on the 11, that's actually pretty clear. Something else I like here is that it seems to be a little bit more natural on the 11. So even though the XS as well as the XR, they had good cameras, sometimes they would be a little bit too over aggressive with their HDR, trying to pull a little bit more detail out even though the image didn't quite look natural. Whereas on the 11, if there's a darker area, it doesn't mind sort of crushing it down a little bit to give you a more natural look. There's still a lot of detail, a lot of dynamic range. That's pretty impressive. Now, something new this year on the main camera is that apparently it has 100% focus pixels. So if I kind of move in and out, specifically if I get nice and close, it should actually do a pretty good job of keeping you in focus. Now, the other thing which is new here is of course that ultra wide camera. So I'm recording video with the standard shooter. However, if I press the ultra wide button, it immediately jumps out to the ultra wide perspective. Now, this is obviously going to give you a little bit of a loss in quality, specifically in low light, but I mean, that's actually really cool, especially considering they've got that really impressive video stabilization. I mean, this almost looks like I'm on a gimbal or something. So this is what video looks like as I'm walking with the ultra wide camera. Between that perspective as well as the super steady shot, gotta say, this is actually pretty impressive. And if I want, I can just jump right back into the main shooter. And I've gotta say, they've done a pretty good job of keeping it consistent. There's no doubt that this year, one of the biggest upgrades to the iPhone 11 is definitely on the camera front. So neither of them were perfect. Both have a lot of issues with the camera and the screen. However, I prefer the look of the 11. It looks a little bit brighter, a little bit more saturated, especially in the background. That portrait mode still actually does look pretty nice though. Let's do a portrait selfie, shall we? So the front-facing camera has been fully redesigned for the iPhone 11. So this is the standard shooter. However, if I press the button, it will make it a little bit wider. Look, friends. I'm actually curious to see how the portrait looks though. What's my iPhone 11 portrait face like? Oh, you know what? It completely missed my glasses. Literally, my glasses are like cut off there. Yikes. That's not great. Let me try another one. Yeah, that's better. Didn't lose the glasses there. It does a pretty good job of like cutting the hair out. There's a lot of detail on my face too. There's definitely no smoothing going on. Now we also have the Slow-fie, which is of course a slow motion selfie. Let me demonstrate. It does slow motion front facing video now. So there's no doubt that the iPhone 11 is a pretty big upgrade on the camera front. However, when you compare it to the Pro, what you are losing here is a telephoto camera. This has the ultra wide and the wide, but not that zoomed in shot. Now, a triple camera setup is certainly nothing new. LG, Huawei, and Samsung have all been shipping triple cameras for a little while now. Now, while it is nice to have a telephoto, honestly, the 2x zoom on the Pro as well as something like on the Note 10 isn't actually that big of a deal. You do lose quality by going with the telephoto, and while it is a little bit more zoomed in, oftentimes I actually find that it's not that useful. As far as I'm concerned, if I was going to pick two cameras, I would prefer that ultra wide. That being said, the 11 Pro does have that other option that you're missing on the 11, but I mean, Now, one of the major new features this year is a night mode for the iPhone 11. So to test, we are here in the studio, which has been pretty much completely blacked out. There's a little bit of light over here from the window, as well as a tiny bit from the ceiling, but it's pretty dark in here, as evidenced by if I turn off this phone screen, you can't see me anymore, can you? Hi, Matt, are you ready to be my photo demo?
Oh yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. So let's start out with the iPhone XR. Okay, so with the XR, ready, and I will say it's not terrible. There's a little bit of detail here, but muddy would be a good way to describe that one. Let's try on the Pixel. Okay, are you ready, Matt?
Oh yeah.
Ready, and you know, that actually looks really impressive. So there's way more detail here. I mean, I can literally see like your individual like eyebrow hairs. That's pretty solid. So something interesting with the iPhone 11 is that we do have a little night mode button. So I can actually change how long it's going to run. So this is with it off and it'll go up to 3 seconds or max of 5. But I'm gonna leave it on the auto setting. All right, are you ready, Matt?
Yep.
And shooting, holding still. counts me down, and boom, we have our photo. That's also very impressive. I mean, it looks like there's straight up light in here. I mean, take a look at what Matt looks like right now. And now take a look at what he looks like on the iPhone 11. The Pixel looks to be a little bit smoother, but I think it's mostly because they're sort of aggressively sort of cleaning up that detail. I do think that the iPhone got the color balance a little bit right. On the Pixel, everything looks a little bit blue. That's pretty impressive, although I will say your skin tones definitely do look better on the Pixel, but everything in the background looks very kind of washed out. That's pretty close. Regardless though, this is super impressive considering just how dark it is in here. If I'm going to point out the biggest weakness of the iPhone 11, it is definitely going to be the display. So just like with the iPhone XR, we're looking at a 6.1 inch IPS panel. And well, just like the iPhone XR, it is usable, it's fine, but it is certainly not as good as most other high-end phones on the market, especially that iPhone 11 Pro. Not only is it fairly low resolution, but it also lacks the excellent brightness and contrast of the OLED on the iPhone 11 Pro. Now, last year, this actually was a slightly closer comparison, as the XR, even though it didn't have the high resolution, it actually was a slightly brighter panel with very, very slightly better color accuracy compared to the XS. But this year, I mean, it's no comparison. The 11 screen is fine, it's usable, but it is not as good as that 11 Pro. Now there are some other small differences, including the bezels are a little bit bigger on the iPhone 11, but on the flip side, you actually have a wider array of colors available. So you have this, what do they call this, like lavender or lilac? There's yellow, there's green, there's red, there's white, there's black. Personally, I like the colors, and I also really like the fact that it does only have the 2 cameras on the back. Obviously, it would be nice to have 3 cameras for practicality, but it's not ugly. You notice this is much, much better than the 11 Pro. Look, I know I'm giving the Pro a hard time, and I'm sure like a month from now I'll completely forget about it, but I can't unsee just how unsightly those triple weird cameras are. I mean, this looks so much cleaner. Now, there are a couple of other downgrades with the 11, but most of them are fairly minor. So it does only support 2x2 LTE as opposed to 4x4, so speeds will be a little bit slower. It is made out of aluminum instead of stainless, which feels not quite so premium. And then there are the other things, such as while it supports fast charging, it doesn't actually come with a fast charger in the box, which is annoying. I mean, a lot of this stuff isn't a big deal. I mean, am I ever going to realize that my 2 meters of water resistance on the 11 isn't as good as like 4 meters of diving on the 11 Pro? No, I'm never gonna take it that deep. But I don't know why anyone else would. If you take a look at Apple's site, they proudly proclaim that the iPhone 11 Pro is the first iPhone worthy of the Pro name. Okay. So when you look at it in real life, it's actually a very straightforward upgrade compared to last year. So instead of selling the iPhone XR, they have the iPhone 11, the XS is turned into the iPhone 11 Pro, and the XS Max is turned into the 11 Pro Max. Because yes, the iPhone 11 Pro Max is now a name that I have to say with my words. While Pro Max isn't exactly a great name, I actually do think that the iPhone 11 is a much, much cleaner branding play compared to the iPhone XR of last year. So I think a lot of people sort of maybe, they didn't write off the XR because it was a very big seller for them. A lot of people assumed that this was the budget iPhone, it's the one that you didn't really want to get. I mean, obviously a few years ago there was the iPhone 5C, which was straight up a worse iPhone compared to the 5S of the day. However, with the iPhone 11, they made this pretty much the default option. If you're gonna go buy a new iPhone, I want the 11, or do you want the Pro with that? Do you want fries with that? Do you want supersize with that? Oh, what if they called it the iPhone 11 Supersize? Now, I've talked in the past about why the iPhone XR was my favorite iPhone of last year, and there were a lot of reasons for that. Not only was it $250 cheaper, but of course it had the best battery life of any iPhone. It was so much better than the XS. However, when you look at the 11 this year, things have changed just a little bit. When Apple announced that the iPhone 11 is cheaper than the iPhone XR, I was legitimately impressed. So now when you look at the lineup, you have at $700 the iPhone 11, at $1,000 you have the Pro, and $1,100 for the Pro Max. But it's actually even a better deal for the XR as soon as you look at the storage. Wait, I mean the 11. The 11. So all 3 phones this year come with 64 gigs standard. However, the iPhone 11 has a $50 upgrade to go to 128 gigs of storage, which in my opinion is the sweet spot. If you want to upgrade the storage on the Pro or the Pro Max, that's a full $150 to go up to 256, which I think is probably overkill for a lot of people. So if you want some kind of mid-range storage, the value proposition looks even better for the iPhone 11. One thing that's the same between the iPhone 11 and Pro are the specs, as inside they share the same Apple A13 Bionic chip. Now, the A12 of last year was already the fastest chip on a phone, and this promises about 20% more performance, so that's good. Now it's easy to kind of make fun of it of like, oh, it's a little bit faster here, a little bit faster there. But the Apple chip making team deserves some major props. This thing is ridiculously powerful. Now there are two ways of looking at this. On one hand, it is a nice thing that both the lower end iPhone 11 as well as the higher end Pro have the exact same spec. And in fact, compared to last year, whereas the iPhone XR had a little bit less RAM, they also share the exact same 4 gigs. The other side, which I do think is important to consider, is that as an Apple designed chip, they've actually made some pretty significant gains in efficiency. So this should be around 30% better than last year, again, directly relating to some of that better battery life that we're seeing on all 3 of the new iPhones. Obviously having a bigger cell inside is important, but having a more power efficient processor that is more powerful and less power using, power inefficient. Basically, it's a faster chip that needs less power to run. They've done this by employing buzzwords such as machine learning. Okay, so hear me out here. The machine learning, the algorithms that they're actually using in that specific part of the A13 chip are actually very powerful, and what they use it for is actually turning off different parts of the A13 Bionic that aren't being used. Now, generally speaking, there's some kind of level of finesse where you can turn off a core, or you sort of idle down something. You can do some stuff traditionally. However, almost every portion of this A13 chip can be completely idled off, which means that you're not losing battery life just sitting around doing nothing. It's actually a very clever thing that they're doing here. Now I think all of this plays into a much grander vision of how the iPhone can continue to stay relevant. Now even at $700, while this is cheaper than the Pro, it is certainly not anywhere near the excellent budget options, which can be several $100s cheaper. On one hand, you have people who have older iPhones, which honestly are still totally fine and not really needing an upgrade. And on the other, you have people who are brand new to buying a new smartphone and they don't mind switching over to Android. And I think to be able to convince both of those groups, you've got to have the whole package, right? And that's why you see such an emphasis on the camera, adding the wide angle, adding these different options. That's why you see such an emphasis on the performance, the battery life. I mean, at this point, if you're selling an expensive phone, you need to deliver on all aspects. It's no longer good enough to have a 90% phone, but it, let's go on this or that. I mean, there are so many excellent phones which are available for $300, $400, $500 that the world has changed in a major way. And when you've got that iPhone 6s, which is still putting in work all these years later, I'm not surprised that Apple is getting a little bit nervous and they're really stepping up the game here.